Peace be upon you, and welcome to a new episode. On July 20th, 2026, a crime was discovered that shocked public opinion across Egypt. A woman in her 70s, who had been living alone in her apartment in a quiet neighborhood of Alexandria, was found dead, with her body dismembered and scattered in several locations, inside the very apartment she had called home. The discovery didn't happen overnight. For days, a strange odor had been growing stronger, day after day. The neighbors became concerned. They called, checked in on one another, and wondered where the smell was coming from. But none of them could have imagined that, just a few days later, the source of that odor would become the headline of every major news outlet in Egypt. We're not going to tell you who was responsible just yet because this story has to be told from the very beginning, from the moment when everything still seemed completely normal to the moment when everything changed forever. The story we're covering today took place in Alexandria, specifically in the Sidi Bishir district. The central figure is a woman who was well known in the legal profession, Sally El Gabbas. Sally was one of Egypt's most prominent lawyers. She earned the title of cassation lawyer, the highest professional rank an attorney can achieve in Egypt. She had built a strong reputation in the legal field and was especially passionate about human rights, particularly cases involving women and family law. She also appeared on numerous television programs where she spoke about mothers' rights, emphasizing that children should honor, respect, and care for their mothers as they grow older. What's striking is that if you watch her old interviews today, you'll notice she frequently talked about the importance of mothers and the responsibility of caring for them. Those words take on a completely different meaning once you reach the end of this story. Sally achieved her success in a remarkably short period of time. She began her career as a trainee lawyer, then became a primary court attorney, later an appellate lawyer, and eventually reached the highest level of the profession as a cassation and Supreme Constitutional Court lawyer, all while she was still in her 20s. In her mid-20s, she was elected to a position within the Egyptian Bar Association. Later, she established a non-profit legal organization that provided free legal services and representation to people who could not afford attorney fees. Whether someone needed help filing for divorce, pursuing a lawsuit, or dealing with any legal issue they couldn't afford to handle, they could turn to her organization for assistance. Her efforts earned her the title of Volunteer Work Ambassador in 2019. As a result, she was invited to appear on numerous television programs where she discussed women's rights and family-related legal issues. Her colleagues in the legal profession described her as a respectful, cooperative person with an excellent reputation. That is why, when news of the case first spread, many of them simply could not believe that Sally was the person accused. Before we get to the day of the crime, it's important to understand that Sally had gone through several extremely difficult personal experiences in her life. Sally had been married more than once. In one of her marriages, she had 2 daughters. Over time, however, their relationship completely broke down, and for years the daughters refused to have any contact with her. In another marriage, she gave birth to a young daughter named Miriam. Tragically, Miriam passed away while she was still a child, a loss that became one of the most devastating experiences of Sally's life. According to people who knew her well, she never truly recovered from her daughter's death. She struggled emotionally for a long time afterward. Of course, this does not explain or justify anything that happened later. It is simply part of the background that investigators considered while trying to understand her state of mind following the crime. As for Sally's first marriage, the one from which she had her 2 daughters, it was reported that after the divorce, Custody of the girls was awarded to their father rather than to her. As the girls grew older, they chose to cut off all contact with their mother. Even when Sally tried to reconnect with them through mutual acquaintances, her efforts were unsuccessful. After that, Sally married several more times, but each of those marriages ended in divorce after relatively short periods. Her marriage to Miriam's father was among her last. After Miriam's death at such a young age, serious disputes arose between Sally and her former husband, with each blaming the other for what had happened. According to people close to Sally, she firmly believed that Miriam's death was the result of medical malpractice at the hospital rather than any negligence on her part. Regardless of the cause, however, losing her daughter was an overwhelming tragedy. Many of those around her noticed that she fell into a severe emotional and psychological struggle that lasted for a considerable time afterward. After everything she had been through, Sally was living with her mother, a woman in her 70s, in their apartment in the Sidi Bishir district. Their relationship had been marked by family disagreements for many years. They were the kind of conflicts that can happen between any mother and daughter, but over time those disagreements, along with the pressures they were both living under, continued to build up without anyone outside the home realizing that anything unusual was happening. According to Sally's own statements during the investigation, her relationship with her mother appeared largely normal before the incident. They would go out together. Sally would take her mother to doctor's appointments and run errands for her, and from the outside, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. At the same time, however, there were long-standing family tensions between them. In her confession, Sally said that her mother often criticized her and repeatedly reminded her that she was divorced. She said those comments deeply hurt her and had a significant impact on her emotional state, continuing for a long time before the day of the incident. The apartment building where Sally lived with her mother was equipped with security cameras on every floor. However, Sally objected to having a camera directly outside her apartment door and requested that it be removed. The camera facing the apartment entrance was, in fact, removed about 2 months before the incident. After the crime, many people linked the removal of the camera to the possibility that the crime had been planned in advance. Investigators, however, explained that the request to remove the camera had been made well before the incident, and that the timing alone was not enough to prove premeditation. They stated that clear evidence would be needed to establish any connection between the two. A few days before the incident, specifically on July 9, 2026, Sally became involved in a dispute with a neighbor who lived on the same floor. According to the neighbor, the disagreement started over something very minor, a trash bin that had been placed between their two apartments. The argument quickly escalated and Sally became unusually angry, which caught the neighbor's attention. A physical altercation followed, while her mother stood beside her, defending her daughter as many mothers naturally would. The neighbor was injured during the confrontation and had to visit a hospital, where he obtained a medical report documenting his injuries. He then filed an official police report. However, sometime later he decided to withdraw the complaint after Sally's mother personally contacted him and offered a sincere and respectful apology. The neighbor later said he was surprised by Sally's reaction because he felt her anger was far greater than the situation warranted, considering that it had begun as nothing more than a simple disagreement between neighbors. Now we come to Friday, July 17, 2026. According to the investigation, this was the day everything changed. Authorities stated that after Friday prayers, an argument broke out between Sally and her mother inside their apartment. No one else was present at the time, so everything known about those moments comes from Sally's own statements to the public prosecution. According to the investigation, the argument escalated rapidly until Sally assaulted her mother and then strangled her to death. What is important to note is that none of the neighbors reported hearing anything unusual that day. There were no screams or loud noises. The neighbor living closest to the apartment emphasized this point repeatedly in his statements, saying that if there had been any significant disturbance, he would have heard it. But he heard nothing at all. This is where the story takes a turn that no one could have imagined. Instead of calling an ambulance or notifying the police, Sally told no one. Over the following days, she behaved normally in front of her neighbors as if nothing had happened. She calmly replied to messages in the building's group chat. The first time someone complained about the odor, she said it was the smell of smoked herring that her mother had accidentally left outside the refrigerator. A day later, when the smell became even stronger, she claimed that a bag of crab had spoiled. At the time, the neighbors were simply puzzled, not suspicious of a crime, because no one could imagine that something so horrific had happened right next door. On Sunday, July 19th, the day of the FIFA World Cup final, the same neighbor who had previously argued with Sally left his apartment in the morning to watch the match. He saw Sally standing outside her apartment using large amounts of bleach and air freshener. Even then, no one connected her behavior to anything serious. The odor continued to grow stronger until it became unbearable. By July 20th, the building manager had tried several times to contact Sally by sending her messages, but she never replied. In reality, she had already fled the apartment the day before. Meanwhile, the neighbors had reached the point where they simply could not tolerate the smell any longer. They kept asking one another where it was coming from, and some began wondering whether something had happened to the elderly woman or her daughter. Still, no one imagined that the truth was a murder. The neighbors eventually contacted the civil defense and the police. Imagine the scene at that moment. The emergency responders were expecting something relatively routine, such as a gas leak or someone who had died alone inside the apartment. They had no idea they were about to uncover something so horrifying. When they entered the apartment, they found that the elderly woman was dead and that her body had been dismembered, with the remains scattered throughout different parts of the apartment. The scene shocked even the investigators at the crime scene. Later, when the neighbors learned the details, many said they could no longer bear the thought of living in the building after what had happened. At that point, the police had not yet officially confirmed the victim's identity. They began questioning the neighbors and learned that the apartment was occupied by Sally and her mother. From that moment on, the investigation shifted beyond simply processing the crime scene. Detectives began tracing movements and analyzing digital evidence. They tried calling Sally's phone, but when someone answered, the investigators were stunned. It wasn't Sally. Instead, a man answered and explained that he had found the phone discarded on the side of the desert highway connecting Alexandria and Cairo, near the Alexandria area, about a 40-minute drive from Sidi Bishr. He said he had no idea who the phone belonged to and certainly didn't realize he was speaking to investigators working on a murder case. For investigators, this was the first indication that Sally had allegedly tried to dispose of anything that could be used to trace her. As an experienced lawyer, she would have known that a mobile phone is often one of the first pieces of evidence authorities use to track a suspect's location. Around the same time, the preliminary forensic report on the victim was completed. It concluded that the primary cause of death was manual strangulation. This was the first forensic finding that aligned with the direction the investigation was taking, providing physical evidence rather than relying solely on Sally's disappearance and flight. The investigation continued, and security authorities were eventually able to trace her movements to an apartment in Sheikh Zayed in Giza Governorate, where she was found hiding. She was arrested on July 23, 2026, roughly 24 hours after the crime had been discovered. Ironically, the very surveillance camera captured the moment she fled the building. She appeared well-dressed, wearing full makeup, a detail that many people later found surprising, as they could not understand how someone in such circumstances could still pay so much attention to their appearance.
After her arrest, Sally was taken back to Alexandria to appear before the public prosecution. At first, she remained silent until the lawyer she had personally chosen arrived. However, after investigators confronted her with the evidence, she confessed to the crime, according to the statements released by the prosecution. Prosecutors later escorted her back to the crime scene, where she conducted a crime scene reenactment. According to the authorities, her reenactment was consistent with the statements she had given during the investigation. As for the motive, reports stated that Sally cited repeated family disputes and what she described as mistreatment by her mother as the reasons behind what happened. The public prosecution ordered that she be held in custody for 15 days pending the investigation. Prosecutors also requested an expedited forensic report, the official autopsy findings, and the results of DNA analysis, so that every aspect of the case could be supported by physical evidence rather than statements alone. On July 25, 2026, the public prosecution also ordered that Sally undergo a psychiatric evaluation to determine whether she had been mentally competent at the time of the incident. This is a routine legal procedure in cases of this nature. It does not mean that a suspect will automatically be found not guilty. Rather, it allows prosecutors to obtain an expert medical opinion that may assist the court in evaluating the case. At this point, it's important to clarify something that many people have misunderstood. A psychiatric evaluation does not automatically result in an acquittal, nor does it necessarily mean that the defendant will be treated exactly the same as someone whose mental condition is not in question. Under Egyptian law, the court has the authority to consider the opinion of psychiatric experts. Ultimately, however, it is the court, not the medical experts, that decides how much weight to give that opinion and determines the appropriate verdict and sentence based on all of the evidence, not on a single report. The case deeply divided public opinion across Egypt. Many people believe that what happened was an exceptionally brutal crime and argue that, regardless of any psychological struggles, no one has the right to take another person's life and dismember the body. From that perspective, they believe the harshest penalties should apply. Others believe that, after everything Sally had endured, including the loss of her young daughter and years of accumulated emotional distress, her story should also be viewed through a more compassionate, human lens. They stress that understanding the circumstances behind her mental state does not mean justifying or excusing the crime. Both viewpoints continue to be widely discussed. In the end, however, it will be the legal system, not social media or public opinion, that determines criminal responsibility. Another point that surfaced during the investigation was that Sally had previously been involved in a separate legal case concerning foreign funding for a non-profit organization she managed. In that case, a lower court imposed a financial fine, which she appealed, and as of now, no final ruling has been issued. This information has been mentioned because it forms part of the broader picture of her professional background, but it is not directly related to the death of her mother. After details of the case became public, Sally's defense team asked the public prosecution to restrict the publication of information about the case in the media and on social media platforms. They argued that the details were highly sensitive
and that extensive media coverage could affect both the ongoing investigation and Sally's right to a fair trial. The request received mixed reactions. Some people viewed it as a perfectly legitimate legal right that any defendant is entitled to, while others questioned why this particular case should be subject to publication restrictions when similar cases in the past had been reported openly. The Bar Association, of which Sally is a member, did not issue a detailed official statement. Instead, it simply noted that the case remains under investigation. At around the same time, another attorney who knew Sally publicly stated that Sally might have been removed from the Bar Association because of the foreign funding case we mentioned earlier. As of now, however, that remains an individual claim and has not been officially confirmed by the Bar Association. It is therefore important to distinguish between information that has been officially verified and claims that have not yet been confirmed.
On social media, the case quickly became the subject of widespread debate. Many people revisited old television interviews in which Sally spoke about the importance of mothers and the responsibility of caring for them. That contrast became one of the most discussed aspects of the case and drew enormous public attention. Some people felt that those old statements made the case even more shocking, while others cautioned against judging someone solely by comments they had made years earlier under circumstances that were completely different from those they were facing at the time of the incident. Sally's brother, who is also the victim's son, publicly addressed the case. According to published reports, he stated that he would not waive his legal rights. He was also the family member who received his mother's remains after the legal procedures were completed and arranged her burial, a heartbreaking position for anyone to be in, serving at the same time as the brother of the accused and the son of the victim. At this stage, the case is still under investigation. Authorities are awaiting the final forensic report, the psychiatric evaluation, and the scheduling of the trial. Under Egyptian law, there is a significant legal distinction between intentional homicide and premeditated murder, and that distinction can have a major impact on the sentence. If the court concludes that the killing occurred in a sudden moment of anger without prior planning, the penalty may range from 3 to 20 years in prison. However, if prosecutors prove that there was premeditation or evidence of a deliberate attempt to conceal the crime, the sentence could be substantially more severe, potentially including life imprisonment or the death penalty. Ultimately, the court's decision will depend on its assessment of all the evidence taken together, not on any single piece of evidence, including the forensic findings and the psychiatric evaluation we discussed earlier. As we've said from the beginning, the final word belongs to the court alone. As disturbing as this case is, it reminds us of something important. Family conflicts, no matter how serious they become, should never be allowed to grow unchecked until they reach a point of no return. If you or someone close to you is struggling with severe emotional distress or escalating family conflict, seeking help from a qualified mental health professional or another appropriate expert as early as possible can make a meaningful difference before the situation becomes impossible to reverse. And with that, today's episode comes to an end. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you receive all the new episodes. See you in a new episode. Goodbye.